Welcome, everybody. This is Jennifer Rigg with the Global Campaign for Education US. We're so delighted that you all could join us today. Thank you so much for being with us from far and wide. We have a fantastic group of presenters and speakers today, and we're really delighted that Gloria Diamond, the Policy Advocacy and Evidence Lead with the United Nations Girls Education Initiative, or UNGEI, is able to join us to help kick us off and get ready for International Women's Day in just a few short days, and also to share some really fantastic work that's underway. Many of you might have heard about or been involved on social media with a brand new education and emergencies focused global campaign that also just launched yesterday. So we'll hear about that and so many other exciting actions and mobilizations right after. But with that, we're really delighted that Gloria could kick off the conversation with us. Huge thanks to our colleague, Chrissy for sharing the slides and organizing, connecting all of us together to bring this conversation together today. We'll go ahead and start Gloria's slides. Wonderful. Welcome, Gloria. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. So yes, just to introduce myself, my name is Gloria. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Policy Advocacy and Evidence Lead for the UNGEI Secretariat. So for those of you who are not familiar with UNGEI, I will just give a quick introduction as to who we are and what we do. Sorry, next slide, please. UNGEI is the UN Girls Education Initiative. We are a global partnership and platform for gender equality in and through education. UNGEI is guided by feminist principles. We are really committed to breaking down silos between different sectors, shifting power, and ensuring partnership with youth-led organizations and young feminist activists is mainstreamed across all of our work portfolios. We also incubate a global network of young feminist activists for education equality called Transform Education. Our mandate is to galvanize joint action for ministries of education, civil society, academia, multilaterals, and governments for girls' education and gender equality. UNGEI is the UN entity for girls' education and gender equality, and we are hosted by UNICEF. Next slide, please. So I'm really looking forward to sharing more about some of our ongoing work to advance gender equality in education around the world, and also to share some exciting new initiatives that we have planned for 2022. In sharing some of these updates and information, I really aim to highlight opportunities for joint advocacy and working. As I mentioned, UNGEI is a partnership, and so collaboration is really embedded into our ways of working, and we will always welcome ideas and feedback on how we can strengthen our collaboration and partnerships, and concrete suggestions for joint advocacy and collective action, in addition to the ones I'm going to share today. Next slide, please. So starting with what's coming up most presently, we have International Women's Day and CSW. So on International Day of the Girl 2021, we launched a campaign called Step Outside the Gender Box for learning free from stereotypes. It's been ongoing ever since. And International Women's Day is a really key moment in this campaign, as it marks a shift or a new phase in the campaign, whereby we are actually launching a program on gender stereotypes this year, which I will talk about a bit later on. So this campaign is really focused around ending gender stereotypes in textbooks, classrooms, and schools. We have produced loads of really exciting digital content to share and amplify on International Women's Day, including a podcast, explainer slides on gender stereotypes in education, just to really break down these concepts, especially for young people. We have social media cards, reels, And so, you know, we have developed a kind of social media digital advocacy pack that partners can hopefully pick up and join us on. So it's an opportunity to join some existing partners to work with us and join advocacy on this issue. We will also be co-hosting an event with UNESCO on ending gender stereotypes, and we will share out some more information on that in the coming days. And then for CSW, our focus is really going to be on gender transformative education and climate justice. We're going to be releasing a kind of youth solidarity circle podcast episode on this issue, and also developing some social media assets and advocacy messages. Two key pieces of work that we are kind of building on and advocating around on this campaign include a youth-led call to action on gender transformative education for climate justice that we launched around COP26 last year, and also a brief on gender transformative education that we developed with UNICEF and PLAN. I will share some links to these after the presentation. So we're really open to ideas for joint advocacy and collaboration on this issue. We're engaging with the G7 Climate and Education Advocacy Group and other working groups. So please do get in touch if this is of interest. Next slide, please. And then, so we are ahead of the G7 and kind of linked to previous work that lots of partners on this call kind of collectively contributed in the last year's G7. We are working on a global objectives monitoring report. So in the UK's, as part of the UK's G7 presidency, 2 global objectives were developed to push for coordinated action on girls' education by 2026. The GEM report team, UIS and UNGEI are working with the FCDO to develop a monitoring and accountability mechanism around these objectives, which will be informed by an annual monitoring report. So this year, in around April or May 2022, we will be launching a baseline report of the 2 girls' education global objectives, which will kick off an annual reporting process. And so through this process, we really hope to achieve a transparent approach to the progress around these objectives, to work with partners to share good practice and lessons learned, and also to really focus in on thematic areas of strategic importance to girls' education and gender equality. So we are still kind of deciding on a date for the launch and plans around that, and we're still in the drafting phase for this report. But we really envisage this as an opportunity for partners to engage with the launch and also to share feedback for consideration in future reports and as part of this broader kind of monitoring and accountability mechanism. We hope that this will really be of interest to all the partners who have worked so hard every year on getting girls' education and gender equality on the G7 agendas, and trying to ensure some kind of continuity and accountability between each presidency. So we will really encourage and support partners to use this report for advocacy leading up to this year's G7 and also the Transforming Education Summit. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, this year we are launching a program called Ending Gender Stereotypes. This area is going to be really a key priority for UNGEI in 2022. So Ending Gender Stereotypes is a multi-country program through the education sector that will pilot play-based school curricula on ending gender stereotypes in primary and secondary schools. We are implementing this in a few different countries in Africa and Asia. And we really hope that the results of this program, including some of the learning and evaluation that we hope to produce around it, can support and guide future programming and related work and advocacy of other partners. And this is a great opportunity for partners who are working on this issue to join a kind of loose coalition of partners that we are convening who are working on gender stereotypes in education to really mobilize technical expertise, do some joint advocacy, and raise funding together to keep the momentum going on this work. Next slide, please. So school-related gender-based violence has been a really integral part of UNGAI's work and portfolio for many years. UNGAI continues to co-chair the Global Working Group to End School-Related Gender-Based Violence with UNESCO, and creates a learning space for research and practice on SRGBV. UNGAI is really a gender voice, advocating for the critical need to apply an intersectional and gender lens to school violence prevention. In 2022, we really want to dial up our advocacy efforts and invite partners to join us on this journey, especially in the context of safe school reopening post-COVID-19. And we are also working to integrate gender violence protection in our programs on ending gender stereotypes, for example, and gender in education and emergencies. So would really, be looking to work with partners on this and the intersectionality of SRGBV in different areas of work. The colleague on the UNGAI team who leads this work is Sujata, so I've just put her name and email at the bottom of the slide there, in case anyone would like to follow up on any of these points. Next slide, please. A new research project that UNGAI is launching or has launched this year is on gender and disability in education. So again, this is an area of work that UNGAI has been really invested in for many years. In 2017, for example, we worked on a report on girls' education for girls with disabilities with Leonard Cheshire. In 2022, unfortunately, there is still a lack of systemic data collection at the intersection of gender and disability in education. Although we do really want to acknowledge the brilliant work of different partners like Leonard Cheshire, Sight Savers, and Humanity Inclusion to try and address this gap. So this year, we are working with the World Bank IEI and Leonard Cheshire to collect new data and evidence on the gendered experiences of learners with disabilities in education, including in the context of COVID-19. This research will engage directly with children and young people with disabilities to hear from them. And UNGAI is also convening an intergenerational advisory group as part of this project to guide the research design and implementation. This is an 8-member group that consists of 4 young people with disabilities who are representing their communities and their youth-led organizations and networks, and 4 representatives of academic and research institutions. So what we really want to work with partners on is how can we keep up the momentum on gender and disability in education following the GDS summit. And so we would really love to hear from partners that might be interested in supporting the launch of this report, and also partners who might be interested in launching future phases of research that could build on the findings of this report, or perhaps kind of dive deeper into the gaps that still exist. For example, the experiences of LGBTQI+ learners with disabilities in education, or SRGBV among learners with disabilities, and so on. Next slide, please. So earlier on, I mentioned a brief on gender transformative education. This was launched in 2021 with UNGAI, UNICEF, and Plan at the Rewired Expo in Dubai. And it was developed through a highly consultative and intergenerational process to develop the brief. This way of working, as we have done in the research project that I've just mentioned, and for this brief is something that UNGAI is really championing. And any partners that are interested in learning more about how we're kind of incorporating intergenerational working across our work, please do get in touch. And so in 2022, we are looking to really build on the momentum of this brief and develop an e-learning course on gender transformative education with Plan and UNICEF. We're still in the early stages. However, I just wanted to flag it as an opportunity for partners to perhaps join a reference group to help shape the design of this course, or support the outreach and dissemination of the course among their organizations and networks and staff. Next slide, please. Okay. So finally, I wanted to talk about the Gender at the Center initiative. So the Gender at the Center initiative, or GCI, was launched in July 2019 by the G7 Ministers of Education and Development. GCI champions the leadership of education ministries and national actors to advance gender equality in education in 8 countries in West and Central Africa. So it's been going on for a few years now, and there's many different areas of work that are really interesting to talk about, but I'm just going to highlight a few areas in 2022 where we would love to partner with GCI members or partners in GCI countries or globally. So firstly, we are working with Cambridge Education to undertake a SWOT analysis on gender mainstreaming in education in the 8 partner countries. And we are currently welcoming partners to join the steering committee for this research. Secondly, in partnership with the GCI Civil Society Consortium, which includes Faraway, Plan and Safer, we are keen to collaborate on joint advocacy and campaigning on gender transformative education at the national, regional and global levels. And finally, we have recently launched the Gender Equality Snapshot Toolkit, which supports education stakeholders to undertake a rapid assessment of where the country stands on gender equality within and beyond education. And we would really welcome members of the GCE coalition who are part of local education groups to pilot and utilize the GES toolkit to undertake these rapid assessments. My colleague Eileen is leading the GCI work for UNGEI, so if you do have any further questions or would like to reach out regarding potential collaboration on any of these points, please do email her using the address below. Next slide, please. So that's all from me, but I think I have gone over my time, so I will ask for any questions to maybe go in the chat box and I can follow up with you there, in which case I will just go to the next slide and say thank you very much to GCE and to all of you for listening, and yeah, please do be in touch. Thank you.
That was terrific. Thank you, Gloria. It's amazing how much you and your colleagues are doing. And so we're so grateful. You can probably see the Zoom applause coming in. And so yes, colleagues, please do share questions in the chat box. Thanks to everybody who's introducing themselves. Please share any advocacy actions and collaboration ideas as well. Over to you, Krista, for the introduction of our next speaker.
Yes, thank you. We're so delighted to have Cristina Álvarez on the call to present on the Education and Emergencies campaign, Protect Education and Emergencies Now. And so we'll hand it over to you. This campaign just launched yesterday, so we're looking forward to hearing more about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for having me at this meeting. This is my second time, and it's a real pleasure. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share the most recent updates on the brand new GCE campaign, Protect Education in Emergencies Now, that would last for a year and that was launched yesterday. So next slide, please. Well, the presentation is really for visuals. I just wanted to mention that the launch was obviously an online event with which I think it's a good panel with government representatives, CSOs representatives, including GCE colleagues, and multilaterals, including UNESCO, GP, and CW. I'm waiting for the statistics, but we also had a quite good attendance, more than 250 people, and great support from very different organizations, including yourselves on social media, which is highly appreciated. And we hope that yesterday's event is the first milestone of an impactful and broad-based campaign that brings real change in terms of guaranteeing the right to education in emergency contexts. So in the short term, we plan to continue making some noise on social media in the run-up to the World Bank Fragility Forum, which is happening next week. So please stay tuned to our Twitter accounts. And to give a bit more of context, I think this campaign comes at a sadly timely moment, as we are now all watching the war breaking out in the doorsteps of Europe live on TV. And as in other crisis and conflict situations, the most vulnerable are always the most affected, particularly children and people with disabilities, amongst others. And I think this must remind us that nobody is spared from war or conflict or other crises, as we have also learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. So in addition to the current tragedy that the Ukrainian population is experiencing right now, we must not forget other conflicts that are shaking other parts of the world. Just taking some of the examples from yesterday's speakers, Yemen has been affected by armed conflict for 7 years, and children are being recruited by fighting parties. And according to the speech by Mr. Asel Sareh, a Yemen journalist and member of the Arab Campaign for Education, more than 2,500 children have been killed in the front line since the beginning of the conflict. And for example, Uganda's Minister Joyce Muriku reminded that Uganda hosts more than 1.5 million refugees, including more than 1.2 million women and children. Next slide, please. So emergencies caused by conflict, by public health issues, or climate-related disasters have a devastating impact on the right to education of millions of people all over the world. And just to give some figures, even prior to COVID, there were 127 million primary and secondary school-aged children and young people living in crisis-affected countries and were out of school. And as you see in the visuals from our campaign pack that was shared with you, 48% of all school-aged refugee children living in crisis-affected countries have no access to education. 54% of the world's out-of-school girls are in crisis-affected countries. And this means a generation of children and young people living in this context are deprived not only to their human right to quality education, but also to the protection that education provides in this context. Because in emergencies, education may be the only safe space. And if you can go through the next slides, you can see more of the visuals that we have from the campaign pack. Sorry, with some more striking data on the situation in education in emergencies. So this campaign aims to put the spotlight to this reality so that the international community and particularly states take urgent, bold, and effective measures to guarantee the right to education in emergencies. And we want to do it by raising the voices of people affected, who are the first responders in emergency situation in an empowering way and running away from victimization. As I think I mentioned in my previous intervention in one of these GCE-US meetings, we are working on a project called Voices from the Ground that aims to embody this storytelling approach. And I'll be ready to tell you more about it in the coming weeks or months, I think. Yesterday, we also issued a political statement that summarizes the key points the campaign is making. I will be sharing the link in the chat box once my presentation is finished. And it's all based on the call to action that I think I also shared with you prior to the launch, that we have jointly developed with GCE members and constituencies, as well as other key partners. and which basically consists of a set of 10 recommendations for governments and other stakeholders on how to address the issues of education in emergencies. So there is a short version to share with policy and decision makers, and a long one which is more specific on each of the asks and recommendations. And these 10 points are summarized in the campaign film, which is the go-to piece to learn what the campaign is about and what we are asking. So if you can, I would like to share it in case you didn't see it yesterday. Yeah, Krista, you go ahead with the video, please.
Yes, I'm just getting there. 1 second.
Okay, sorry.
You're fine.
Education is a basic human right. Yet even prior to COVID-19, 250 million children and youth were out of school, and 800 million adults were illiterate. Conflict, climate change, disasters, public health emergencies, and the forced displacement of people within and across borders are affecting a growing number of people all over the world. In 2021, 235 million people were in need of humanitarian assistance and protection. Emergencies have a devastating impact on the right to education of millions of people. In 2019, 127 million primary and secondary school-aged children and young people living in crisis-affected countries were out of school. For the most marginalized, learners with disabilities, girls, and those from low-income households, among others, the impact is much greater. Despite this dire situation, education remains one of the most underfunded areas of humanitarian aid, receiving just 2.4% of total global humanitarian funding. A generation of children and young people living in emergencies are deprived not only of their human right to quality education, but also of the protection that education provides in these contexts. In emergencies, education may be the only safe space. This must change. Together, we can protect education in emergencies now. Solutions lie in the hands of governments. If we raise our voices and stand side by side as a global movement, we can make sure that the right to education is realized in emergency contexts. So together, we must call upon our governments to 1. Protect and guarantee the fulfillment of the right to education for all in emergency contexts by providing safe and accessible learning environments for all learners without any discrimination. 2. Develop and implement crisis-sensitive national education plans and budgets. 3. Listen to the voices of the people affected and local actors. 4. Ensure sufficient, sustainable, and predictable funding for education in emergencies. 5. Promote equitable and sustainable inclusion in national education systems for refugees, asylum seekers, returnees, stateless and internally displaced persons. 6. Ensure that girls and women have equal opportunities to fulfill their right to education in emergency contexts. 7. Apply a perspective inclusive of learners with disabilities in the planning, budgeting, and implementation of emergency responses. 8. Ensure the availability of adequately trained and remunerated teachers in emergency contexts. 9. Endorse and implement the Safe Schools Declaration and ensure that all learners and educators can learn and teach in safety. And 10. Promote transformative education, psychosocial support, and social and emotional learning approaches. Protect education in emergencies now. Visit our website to find out how to take action today.
So thank you so much, Krista, for sharing. I hope you like the video, that you find it useful for campaigning, and we encourage you to use it as widely as possible. And as you can see, one of the key points of the call to action is, of course, funding, because education remains one of the most underfunded areas of humanitarian aid, receiving just 2.4% of total global humanitarian funding. So yesterday at the global launch, we had a powerful message from Jasmine Sharif calling on government for increasing funding for education in emergencies. She said, we need to have the funding to pay for a holistic and child-centered education that is continuous and offers quality and leads to real learning outcomes. So, of course, supporting the ECW replenishment process in the upcoming months will also be a key priority for this campaign. And in terms of next steps, and I know you were all waiting for this, the most immediate key moment for us will be the Global Action Week for Education, which will take place from the 25th to the 30th of April, with a focus, of course, on education in emergencies. So real planning for Global Action Week will start next week. I have to say we are 2 people doing all this with lots of support, but leading this process. But what I can tell you so far is that we would like to replicate the way it worked last year, meaning having 1 action day per region. So we are aiming to reach all regions and constituencies early next week, to have internal workshops with all of you so that you can choose a day for action and a specific focus from the 1 or several of the 10 points in the call to action, the ones that resonate more in your context. And from the Secretariat, we of course will support the events and activities that each region decides to take forward and that we can jointly organize. So we'll stay in touch from early next week to start this process. I also have to say that Global Action Week will have a very strong focus. In less than 2 weeks, the GCE Youth Constituency will be celebrating its first youth focus, and our campaign will have a space in the meeting for joint brainstorming with GCE youth leaders to explore ways for active and innovative participation of youth, both during Global Action Week and throughout all the campaign. So if you want some more information on the youth focus, on this youth focus, you can also email me. I will put my email also in the chat box. And finally, we plan to be present or try to have some influence as GCE alone on mostly with partners in key advocacy fora, such as the World Bank Spring Meeting, C7, High Level Panel Forum, or C20. And of course, the Transforming Education Summit in September. I can't share many details about this at the moment, but we are also part of the Education Advocacy Working Group of G7 with Jennifer and some other colleagues. But we'll keep you posted via members mail, and of course you can always reach me on or our fantastic GCE-US director and coordinator for updated information as we move forward. So yeah, I think I'm on time. If you have any questions, please share those in the chat box. I'm sharing all the documents in the chat box together with my email. And yeah, we are really also open for collaboration with all of you and also with the UNGAI colleagues and other partners. Really impressive UNGAI's work. I think there are some commonalities and spaces for collaboration. So it's really great to be here. And thank you so much, everyone, for sharing the campaign materials. I encourage you to do so in the campaign pack, which I will also be sharing in all 5 GCE languages. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Very interesting to hear about this very timely campaign. Oh, apologies, I was not on video. Thank you so much. It's definitely something that we all need to be very clued in about as to current events. and making sure that education in emergencies is accessible for all children and youth, particularly the most marginalized. Next, we're pleased to invite Dr. Rose Cardarelli to speak. She is the CEO of the Education for All Coalition, and they have recently joined the Global Campaign for Education US. We want to remind you that we are a coalition and we have more than 80 organizations in our coalition committed to the universal quality right to inclusive education. And we are accepting applications on an ongoing basis. So I will share my screen and hand it over to Rose.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Krista and Jennifer and the Global Campaign for Education, thank you so much for inviting us to participate. I'm very excited to be here today. And Cristina, I was in the session yesterday, so thank you for that recap. And Gloria, I would like to partner with you in every way possible because all the work that you're doing is so good and so wonderful. I was asked today to tell you a little bit about myself and how our organization, the Education for All Coalition, came to be. So my background is a little different, probably different than anybody that's in the audience. My first career was as a Medical Service Corps officer in the United States Army. I later became a senior civil servant with the Department of Defense and became a professor of human security and the director of outreach for 31 countries in the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. After that, I just felt compelled to give back and I looked around the world to find out where I would have the most significant impact. And I decided it was working with children in need and to support them and to provide education. I had seen several generations of refugees that have grown up without an education. And to me, that was devastating because it meant that they weren't competitive in employment. They weren't competitive in their professions. They weren't competitive to help their country. So education is a fundamental need for everyone. I currently sit on several education boards. I'm with Childhood Education International in Washington, D.C., the International Honor Society of Education, Kappa Delta Pi, Fitchburg State University, and the Innovation Academy at the Global NGO Executive Committee at the United Nations. My organization is also formally associated with the Department of Global Communications and the Innovations Academy at the United Nations. And I'm a Rotary International representative to UNICEF and a UNESCO Social Emotional Learning Ambassador to the US and a Global Refugee Forum partner with UNHCR. Next slide, please. So again, my career began with the military and the government, and that prepared me to work as a humanitarian. I commanded the largest training battalion in the Army, and I trained all the doctors, nurses, corpsmen, and technicians, and prepared them for deployments around the world. I commanded at hospitals and the Wounded Warrior Brigade at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, taking care of wounded warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I served on, believe it or not, a medical mission to Chernobyl when we had that disaster. That shows how old I am. It shows that I spent a lot of time in Europe. And it's very relevant today with what's going on in the Ukraine because Chernobyl is there and it's a very dangerous place. But we actually had an American team that had been there on a shopping tour of all things. And when the disaster happened, we had to send a medical team in there to ensure that they were safe and that they were okay to come back. And I served in humanitarian missions in Haiti, and this was when I was on active duty. And then my service in the military took me to 4 different continents and many countries around the world. So I felt like that prepared me for humanitarian work. Next slide, please. So how did the Education for All Coalition come about? Well, first of all, we all realize that there's 84 million people that have been forced to leave their homes, and over 12 million of them are children. By 2050, there'll be 200 million climate refugees. And while we're still cautious about an unpredictable world because of COVID, we now have the possibility of 5 million more refugees due to the events that are happening in the Ukraine. I was invited back in 2017, 2018 to work with Oxfam at the International Refugee Congress to facilitate the medical portion that contributed to the Global Compact on Refugees, and the UN approved that in December of 2018. So shortly thereafter, the Education for All Coalition evolved with a mission to bridge the educational gaps experienced by displaced children around the world. Next slide, please. So here is our mission and vision statement. We are a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to creating educational opportunities that empower children and improve the lives of their teachers as well. I look at that as a package. We can't look at just the children. We need to look at the teachers, the caregivers, those that are providing education and support, and help them to become more resilient and thriving critical thinkers with great global competencies to be able to function in a challenging world as complicated as it is today. So we want them all to reach their unlimited potential. Next slide, please. So here are our values and responsibilities. I'm sure it's very similar to all the statements that all the organizations have. I believe our core values should also include competency, though, because we're dealing with children that are very fragile, that have mental health issues, and that are sometimes discriminated against. We feel like competency by the staff members that provide the support is paramount. Next slide. So here are our program pillars. Our literacy programs are place-centered. It's a place-centered approach to stimulate creativity and play, to bring joy and happiness. We aim for a healthy emotional development through psychosocial support methods. We support teachers with trauma-informed approach in their classroom management. And our latest program incorporates social emotional learning with a climate awareness lens to address migration challenges. I think as we work with programs, on an operational emergency basis for today, we also need to think strategically in all that we're doing for sustainability. And we know climate is sort of the, overwhelming issue that all of us are going to face, but we're going to have more migration due to climate. So I want children to be aware of their environment, not necessarily maybe from a, grow a tree perspective, but just their relationship with other living things. Next slide, please. So our pre-COVID missions took us to the US-Mexico border, took us to Athens, Greece, the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and our current programs are going to take us back to Greece, Lebanon, Yemen, and Myanmar. Now, as you all know, there are political, governmental issues going on in Yemen and Myanmar, and it's very, very difficult to be able to implement programs there, but we have great contacts, great organizations that are there that are welcoming our particular programs into their system. Yemen would like us to implement a program that's in all their national schools. So that's what we're working on. And as of yesterday, we began discussions about the European theater to see how we can assist with the current situations. I spent 13 years in Europe in my military career, so that is an area that's very familiar to me, and hopefully we'll be able to provide assistance. Next slide, please. This is just a quick snapshot of our curriculum methods and how we use innovative curriculum that brings the nexus of social emotional learning with climate education and environmental awareness, as I mentioned. Next slide. Our goal is to ensure that children gain the necessary skills to be globally competent, and this is through their own self-awareness, through social awareness, through environmental connection, through literacy competencies, and all while enforcing their well-being and ensuring that our programs are based on research and then validated with data. So I'm working with a publisher now to publish the results of the programs that we'll implement in Greece, Lebanon, Myanmar, and Yemen. And again, there'll be social emotional learning, climate education programs as case studies. Next slide. Of course, all of you know we're incorporating the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals in everything that we do. But in reality, we only have 8 years to show significant progress or accomplishments. And with the challenges that we've had with COVID and war-torn situations like in Ukraine now, it's going to be very difficult to meet all those goals, but we have to strive to incorporate them into all of our programs. And in particular, we focus on these 7 in all of our programs. Next slide. So what sets us apart from many of the like-minded NGOs that are doing all great work? Well, we have a mindful approach to relationships in the natural world, and we focus on the global competencies, as I mentioned. We are working with Resilience Incorporated to create a speech-activated emotional app, which is based on science and used in Parkinson's disease, where you can speak into the app, children can speak into the app, and then it can measure emotional, their emotional situation and then how to respond to that. So that's in the development phases at this point. We're working with the Innovations Academy at the UN to create a digital wallet. This is to help children when they are actually forced to migrate, because what we've discovered is they arrive in countries without records, without school records, and maybe they don't speak the language. So where do you place them in grades? So it's important if they can carry their own records with them. And for youth that may have had vocational training and skills, if they're able to carry a record with them, then they're able to show where they might be able to fit into the employment arena in their host country. We also realized that with the Afghan refugees that came to the United States recently, there were many professionals, and they purposely destroyed their records in country so that they wouldn't be caught with those records and then detained to stay back in country. So having a digital wallet may be the solution, and UNHCR is working on matters like that as well. So this also makes us unique, is that we have licensed trauma and support, social work support professionals that are on staff. And we are partnered with individuals from Stanford University, UNESCO, and West Attica University in Greece. And our signature program that we were developing prior to the Ukraine was Where Friendship Blooms. And this demonstrates the fun and camaraderie among children. When they plant something, they learn to play, they learn about nature, they see something grow. It may make them aware of food security, water security. So that's the aspect of that. We are also providing consultation to the American Counseling Association that's looking at whether they should be working overseas and in the international space, and the Society for Social Work and Healthcare. And we've contributed to the publishing of a book chapter, and that's based on our findings and the books that are in the editor's inbox right now. All right, next slide. This is just a quick snapshot of Where Friendship Blooms and our data collection outline for our 12-week program. Next slide. This is another snapshot. It's very busy, I'm sorry, but it shows the type of assessments we're doing to identify teacher improvement goals based on indicators, classroom climate to address challenges identified, student strengths, challenges, obstacles, and goals, all based on our program pillars. So we can focus the teacher and the students on changes in behavior to hopefully make them able to assimilate and to work cooperatively with others. Next slide. So this is our brilliant team. I'm proud to say that 3 of the members of this team recently received a President Biden Service Award for their work with EFAC. So I'm very, very happy with that. It's something that is a nice reward for them for their services. Next slide. These are just some of the organizations that we work with. Next slide. And of course, the topic of today is the refugees that are associated with Ukraine. I heard this quote the other day and it really resonated with me. A woman said, "I have been forced to quit my home." So we all need to keep that in mind as we look at our programs and how we can best serve the refugees that are coming out of Ukraine. Now, from my military experience, I can tell you that the first priority, of course, are the basic human needs of shelter, food, water, healthcare. Education, just like with money and funding, always has sort of a secondary priority. And the reason being is they need to make sure that individuals are safe and that they have the basic needs that they need in order to survive before we look at education. But again, as I mentioned earlier in my briefing, you need to think strategically as well as operationally for today. So while we're attending to the needs of these individuals in a desperate situation, we also need to plan what is the future for them and how can we best assist them from an educational perspective. Next slide. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to participate in any collaborative opportunities, because I believe that is the only way that we will work together. I was very proud of being a part of UNHCR's Global Refugee Forum, because it was at that time that I noticed that 3,000 entities from government, business, civil society all came together to make their contributions and to work collaboratively together. That is the only way that we'll be able to be a force to be able to address these issues. So thank you very much. And I'm very proud and pleased to be here and to know everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. We're very pleased to have had you as well present today. And thank you for your very timely remarks. We'll include some more time to discuss advocacy strategies and what different organizations are doing in regards to Ukraine and prioritizing education and emergencies at the end. So thank you for that opening. Next, I'm very pleased to invite our colleague Zein Nasser to speak. She represents Global Citizen and she'll be speaking about Global Citizen's Girls Education Strategy. Over to you.
Hey, Krista, thank you so much. And it's great to be here today and let you know about our exciting plans for the year ahead. I didn't prepare any slides, but I'm still excited to tell you about what we have planned. So we were initially set to launch our 2022 campaign on February 24th, but in light of what's been happening in Ukraine, we've now pushed it back to March 8th, so next Tuesday, and that's still tentative to change a little bit. But nevertheless, I wanted to share with you what our plans for the year look like, what the campaign is shaping out to be, and then I'll hone in specifically on education. So for years, Global Citizen has said it wants to end extreme poverty by 2030, but this is no longer enough. The reality is that we have to work to end extreme poverty now. So to that end, our 2022 campaign is focusing on 3 key areas, which we see as essential to driving the most change and with the potential to create the largest impact. These 3 areas are empowering adolescent girls with investments in nutrition, education, and healthcare, ending systemic barriers that are preventing the end of the COVID-19 pandemic and unlocking funding to help low-income countries, and defending the planet by ensuring that action on climate change is centered on supporting low-income countries. So through a combination of both our own tentpole events, which I'll get into a little bit later, as well as other activations around global moments, our goal is to deliver the greatest impact that we can across these areas. Working on adolescent girls, we're working with key partners, including Education Cannot Wait, UNFPA, WFP, and EFAD, in order to address the myriad of issues that a young girl faces, from lack of access to education, to being deprived of access to sexual reproductive health care, to broader issues of gender equity and justice. Our systems campaign is looking at healthcare and financing. On the health side, it's focusing on an end COVID now response with vaccine delivery, getting them to people, production capacity, and immunization, particularly as these are some of the key issues which must be addressed if we wish to move beyond the pandemic. And then within financing, we're focusing on SDRs and other IMF and World Bank mechanisms to unlock funding for the poorest countries, as well as taxation, while continuing the fight for more and better ODA. And then finally, on climate change, we'll continue to work on emissions reduction, international climate financing, loss and damage, race to zero, but also climate adaptation and supporting the poorest and marginalized, like Indigenous people or frontline partners throughout EFAD and CGIAR activities. As far as our work on education is concerned, our key campaign partner is going to continue to be Education Cannot Wait. So the majority of our advocacy throughout the year will be focused on mobilizing support from key donor governments ahead of Education Cannot Wait's 2023 replenishment. Given the critical and urgent need to support girls' education in emergencies and ECW's ambitious goals towards girls' education, we'll amplify our girls' framing as strategic to support our goals. That said, we'll continue to push for education in emergencies for all, including children with disabilities, children who identify as LGBTQ, and beyond, to make sure that no one is left behind. We're still in the process of finalizing our key government targets, but we're most likely going to be exploring continued support from the US and Canada, as well as from the EU. And then we're looking into bringing in new government support, perhaps from Qatar or the UAE. We're also seeking to secure new funding for ECW through potential private sector funding, such as from businesses or philanthropists. These discussions are still in really early stages, and we're working in tandem with ECW to finalize the details of which governments and donors we plan to target. And while we will focus our education resource mobilization efforts on ECW, we're also looking at leveraging partnerships in our model to elevate the broader movement for SDG 4 and global education. For example, we're going to continue to publish content through our platform about the issue and its solutions, and we're looking to collaborate with private sector partners like Verizon to promote the importance of addressing the digital divide in education. We're also exploring the possibility of working with the LEGO Foundation to highlight the role of learning through play to support the achievement of SDG 4. As part of our 2022 campaign, we'll be hosting a number of key tentpole moments, and we're also planning to mobilize around key international moments. So following our 2022 policy platform launch on March 8th, we're We're going to have a number of Instagram Live discussions, including one on girls' education, potentially with UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador Namzamo Mbata. And then on May 22nd and 23rd, we'll host our first ever Global Citizen Leadership Summit and Prize titled Global Citizen Now. This will be an urgent gathering to defeat poverty and defend the planet, and will be taking place in person in New York City. It's going to be a gathering of 200 plus world leaders, community and business leaders, artists, and champions from the nonprofit space, and it's going to facilitate discussions on ways forward for solving our biggest challenges to defeating poverty. Main stage programming will be streamed live, and it's going to be open to invited press with additional time set aside for intimate and peer-to-peer conversation. Global Citizen Now will feature thought leadership panels with GC Prize winners, and we'll be focusing on the importance of ensuring education for adolescent girls and inviting partners from the private sector to speak to the role of the private sector in this crucial initiative, allowing them the opportunity to highlight their own work in the education sector. We already have confirmation of attendance by DSG Amina Mohammed and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, as well as former UN Women, Executive Director from Zimbabwe, champions like Ed.D, and more. And then in September, we have our 10th annual Global Citizen Festival in Central Park. Education will be featured as a key issue area in the festival through a high quality video on the issue, and it's going to be shown during the global broadcast. We're also planning on using the Transforming Education Summit to be hosted in September to focus on averting generational catastrophe and rethinking the educational system. In addition to that, Global Citizen is in current and constant interaction with the governments of Germany and Indonesia as 2022 presidencies of the G7 and G20 respectively. Around these events, we'll promote particular policy asks as they pertain to education, and pending final approvals on our in-person presence, we'll explore the organization of some events on the sidelines of these summits. As a key facet of our 2022 campaign, we also plan to launch a number of content pieces and actions throughout the year focusing on education, and we're exploring the possibility of using Twitter Spaces or having podcast discussions with education activists. That's more or less what our plans look like at the moment. I hope that's been helpful, and I'll pop my email in the chat box in case anyone has any specific questions you can send over to me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zein. And we're looking forward to collaborating with you on many of these key education advocacy moments. We know that now more than ever is a crucial time to be prioritizing education and making sure that it's inclusive for all learners, especially girls and children with disabilities and LGBTQI+ learners as well. So thank you so much for that. And we look forward to staying in the loop and continuing to collaborate on that. Next up, I'm pleased to introduce Rachel Wisthuff. She's the Director of Policy and Advocacy at UNICEF USA, and she'll be speaking about education advocacy during the German G7 presidency, as well as UNICEF's current efforts to support the crisis in Ukraine and ensure education and emergencies as part of the response. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Krista. I appreciate it. And I think this is has been a good lead up to this section because, you know, UNGEI is working around G7 accountability mechanisms, and clearly G7 is one of these critical moments that we can look forward to throughout the year to try to promote and prioritize education, particularly for girls, for the most vulnerable, and for those who are facing crisis in conflict settings. So just to take a step back, for those of you who are less familiar with the G7 process, it is annual. It happens on a rotating basis. This year, the German presidency is hosting, and they do have a website that I can pop in the chat, and they've outlined 5 key priorities. The first is strong alliances for a sustainable planet. The second is setting the course for economic stability and transformation. The third is enhanced preparedness for healthy lives. Number 4, sustainable investments in a better future. And 5 is stronger together. So typically what happens is that we look at these priorities and we determine how can we make sure that education is integrated, interwoven into what the German presidency has outlined. In this case, for number 2, looking at inclusive growth and education as an investment in a better future to the point of number 4. Specifically on 4, the German government has also outlined a focus on girls' education. And that's not wholly unsurprising. Girls' education has been a through line in recent G7 presidencies, from Canada to last year in the UK. And lastly, point number 5, stronger together, which is a bit broad, does focus on reigniting the international community and focusing on multilateral investments. So that is where we can come in to really focus our efforts on GPE, on ECW, and some of those larger investments. So kind of the key dates to look out for: in May, there will be some ministerial meetings. The first is May 12th to the 14th. That's when the foreign ministers come together. And G7 is the 7 nations that are part of this process. UK, Germany, France, United States, Canada, Japan. Oh my goodness, and I'm missing one. Probably Germany, if I haven't said it already. Italy. And so I just want to make sure that those foreign ministers are prepared, headed into those meetings with talking points that we help to provide and devise. And then the second ministerial meeting is May 18th through the 19th, and that's when development ministers come together. And this time they'll do that in tandem with the health ministers. So there's these initial meetings leading up to the big summit where all heads of state come together in June in Germany. And we really have an opportunity to influence the process along the way. There is a global education working group that seeks to put together broad policy proposals. And they are in development as of right now. So if anybody is interested in weighing in on that and feeding into that process, we're happy to connect you there. Those recommendations are really aligned with what the German government is focusing on. So currently they're looking at resilient education systems, gender equality in marginalized groups, and then accountability and financing. And then based on those recommendations from a US perspective, a number of us work in collaboration, thanks to the great support of GCE-US, to propose our own recommendations to the US government. And so those are also in draft form, being whittled down. But our focus is, again, trying to see how we can most influence US policymakers and tailor recommendations to their interests, while also keeping in mind the German government's interests, while also keeping in mind the broader needs of the community. We don't want to just do things for political expediency. We want to make sure that we're also taking into consideration the need for these resilient education systems, the need to prioritize the most vulnerable, et cetera, and building on prior investments, prior commitments. So currently we're looking at two broad recommendations. The first being prioritize investments in safe, quality, and inclusive education, particularly the most vulnerable, including girls and children with disabilities. And this would include policies for continued education of children, accelerating safe school reopenings, making sure there's integrated service deliveries of mental health and psychosocial support, nutrition, et cetera. Looking at making sure that we're including teachers and curricula in this process, and that we're fostering holistic learning, which includes climate action. Making sure that data is disaggregated and that any learning recovery plans are really focused on that data disaggregation angle so that we can reach those who have been underserved. And then finally, investing in all manners of solutions to support education systems for those who are facing crises, and really looking at accessible and inclusive ICT to help bridge the digital divide. So that's one bucket. And then the second bucket is looking at those previous commitments. So not only fulfilling past commitments, but pledging new commitments to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. That's on a bilateral scale, it's on a multilateral scale. It's looking at sustainable development goals, as Rose talked about. It's looking at increasing funding for the Global Partnership for Education and bilateral education, and taking into consideration the Education Cannot Wait replenishment that we're expecting next year so that the US can make a robust multi-year pledge. And bringing the Safe Schools Declaration into it. We feel like this is the right time, particularly with Ukraine, to have the US support the Safe Schools Declaration and be accountable for the international standards laid out there. So using that I'll transition a little bit into Ukraine. UNICEF is on the ground in Ukraine. It has 4 offices throughout the country, including some in the eastern region of Ukraine. Some of you might have seen reports that 6 total education facilities have been damaged up until this point, 3 in government-controlled areas and 3 in non-government-controlled areas. And of course, in non-government controlled areas, schools have been closed since February 21st. And we're seeing increasing school closures in government-controlled areas as the conflict lines come closer and closer. I think the thing to emphasize is that learning does continue to the best of teachers and government officials and community's ability. UNICEF is currently fundraising for emergency education supplies to get to those front lines. In the latest appeal, which just came out yesterday, so pardon me while I try to pull it up, UNICEF is looking at providing recreational and early childhood development kits for about 8,000 children, and then education kits for about 16,000 children. So that's working with our supply division to make sure these items are readily available, which they are. They can ship it from 48 to 72 hours from Copenhagen, and then making sure that they actually reach the communities that need them. And then this also includes working with the Ministry of Education to help rebuild and support the rehabilitation of schools that have been damaged during the conflict. So that is a part of the process as well. But we know that currently 350,000 children are without access. And as Rose indicated, this might not be top of mind or the foremost concern for those who are working on the response, but certainly education is so much more than just school-based learning. It is mental health and psychosocial support. It is child protection. It is a sense of normalcy that provides children with the well-being that they need to survive and thrive. So UNICEF is certainly keeping that a part of its emergency appeal, and then hoping that education can help keep that sense of normalcy for children as the conflict escalates and progresses. So I'll leave it there. I don't have all the answers, but happy to try to sort through any questions people might have.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for all that you're doing and the information that you just quickly shared. We really are so grateful for your leadership. And on the G7 front, that builds on an exciting new initiative that we're delighted to hear a little bit more about from Chrissy Hart, the Director of Policy and Advocacy with Together for Girls. Some of your organizations might have already signed on to the Brave Movement's G7 call to action on ending childhood sexual violence, but we wanted to make sure that partners across the education sector know about these really critical opportunities impacting children and youth writ large. So Chrissy, welcome. We're so delighted you could join us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Krista, for the opportunity to join today. I'm just going to set up the slideshow here. There we go. So by way of a quick introduction, for those who might be unfamiliar with Together for Girls, we're a global public-private partnership working with 24 national governments that have or will conduct a violence against children and youth survey, otherwise known as a VAX. These are comprehensive household surveys that gather data on the prevalence and nature of physical, sexual, and emotional violence against children. We focus on all forms of violence against children everywhere, but particularly focus on sexual violence and girls. We take a 3-pronged approach to violence prevention, focusing on data and evidence to inform advocacy and drive action. And we've recently conducted secondary analyses of the VAX to better understand violence in and around schools particularly, and its relationship to educational opportunities and outcomes. Just a quick map that shows where we have or will conduct a VAX. These are conducted by national governments with technical support from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And this is just a quick example of some of the analyses that I talked about that we've done, really focusing on what we can glean from the VACs about the relationship between violence and school settings and educational outcomes. And I'd encourage everyone to check out the sort of wealth of further information we have. I'll share the link to our schools page, togetherforgirls.org/schools. But today I am joining the coalition call to share information about the BRAVE movement and our G7 call to action. So huge thanks to you, Rachel, for setting things up so nicely. The BRAVE movement is a nascent but rapidly growing global effort. It's led by adult survivors of child sexual abuse and exploitation, as well as allies, with the goal of coalescing a boldly transformative network of individuals and global organizations to transform global violence prevention and response effort. The movement views sexual violence as a critical entry point to addressing all forms of violence against children, including school-related gender-based violence and violence as a barrier to education. And to this end, we're working very closely with Safe Schools focused networks, including Safe to Learn and the Global Working Group to End SRGBV. So the BRAVE movement aims to end sexual violence against children and adolescents and envisions a world in which children and adolescents grow up free from the threat of sexual violence. We aim to do this by coalescing a global networked and inclusive advocacy movement of survivors and allies with two key strategies. The first, elevating and supporting survivor voices and leadership, and the second, supporting international movement building and aligned coordinated advocacy and campaigns. The movement is focused on three key areas of action. Those are prevention, healing, and justice. Our theory of change is predicated on two key components. The first is shifting social norms to reduce stigma for survivors and their families, and to increase awareness of the prevalence of sexual violence and the fact that violence is preventable. And second, we advocate for bold and ambitious global and national agendas focused on the development and implementation of transformational policies and programs that are both robustly funded and scalable. So the BRAVE movement is led by a sort of, I guess, bicameral structure. And the first part of that structure is the SAGE, a powerful group of 15 survivor leaders representing almost every region of the world and multiple forms of sexual violence against children and adolescents. And these are a few faces of the SAGE, including Together for Girls CEO and Executive Director, Daniela Leggiero. We are also governed by a global steering group that includes representatives of global survivor groups and organizations committed to the BRAVE movement that will focus on global institutions to increase funding, awareness, and policy change. So in 2022, the movement will focus on several key areas. The first is mobilizing global survivors to, again, develop national and global calls to action and lead a global survivor summit that will take place in April. And we aim to launch campaigns focused on three key areas and additionally to amplify calls to action by allied organizations such as GCE and other coalitions and networks. So our campaigns will really focus on mobilizing billions for prevention, healing, and justice, abolishing the statute of limitations around the world, and ensuring child rights-driven end-to-end encryption. So upcoming key moments are sort of displayed here, and the G7 is really a particular focus for us upcoming. And so in view of the G7 convening in June, the BRAVE movement has launched a call to action. This has already been endorsed by GCE-US and many coalition members. It's led by German survivor groups. And the ask really focuses on a number of requests from G7 advocate survivor leaders, and these include prioritizing ending childhood sexual violence, specifically delivering on existing G7 commitments, including meeting in 2022 to drive forward the existing action plan to combat child sexual exploitation and abuse, and delivering on a $1 billion contribution to the End Violence Fund that is hosted at the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. And then additional asks include engaging with survivors, developing and implementing national action plans and strategies, again, mobilizing billions for a global financing mechanism to scale prevention, healing, and justice. And to date, we've had about 100 organizations sign on, and we greatly welcome additional signatories. I will drop the link to the G7 call to action in the chat. And please feel free to reach out to me. I'm Chrissy at togetherforgirls.org. Additionally, we will launch the movement website tomorrow, but I've included the address here if you'd like to take a sneak peek. So thanks very much. I'll include those links in the chat.
Thank you for that sneak peek, and thank you for your important work. We absolutely encourage everybody to get involved and sign on if you haven't already. One of the key pieces that will bring all of this work together, we're so grateful to our colleague Stephanie Peña for leading on the Right to Education Index in the US, which spans some of the domestic and global work on human rights and the right to education. Over to you, Stephanie.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to present to you today on the Right to Education Index findings, and which helped to inform our draft on the US country brief, which we'll be sharing with you at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Right to Education Index is a global accountability initiative that aims to ensure that all people, no matter where they live, enjoy the right to quality education. RTEI is a global index which is built from international rights to education frameworks to monitor national progress towards its fulfillment. So it's also helps to reveal key areas that need improvement and can be used for country to country comparisons and to track progress over time. It can be a really useful tool and also used to like strengthen the expertise and capacity of civil society and education advocates, and increase public and political support for realizing the right to education, and ultimately just really hold governments accountable and institutions accountable for their commitments to the right to education. Next slide. So RTEI's primary tool is the RTEI questionnaire, which GCE-US filled out on behalf of the United States this round. As you can see on the graph on the screen, there are a total of 15 countries that have participated and 5 key themes, again, from using human rights frameworks such as governance, availability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability. Additionally, each of these themes contain many embedded sub-themes that address cross-cutting issues within education. And these themes and sub-themes are given a score from 0 to 100 based on the answers from the questionnaire. And those scores ultimately are contribute to the overall country score. Next slide. Thank you. So after GCE-US completed the RTEI questionnaire, we sent it back to World Vision. They had it peer reviewed and sent back to us with comments, really great and helpful. And once we finalized all of that, we were given our country score. As you can see here, we received a score of 79%, which is progress from the last RTEI. However, there are several areas with exceptionally low scores, which you can see highlighted here in yellow for you. These low scores helped to inform our country brief, which we're going over today and sharing with you all to get your feedback and input before we finalize the country brief. Next slide. Great. So for our country brief, we chose to highlight 2 areas that the US scored the lowest on. Unfortunately, the United States was the lowest scoring country of all the countries included in RTEI, with a score of 28% for the international framework, which is a sub-theme of the governance theme and our first highlighted issue. So this sub-theme essentially assessed whether governments are party to a number of UN treaties, UNESCO treaties, ILO conventions, Geneva conventions, and other regional treaties that are related to the protection of human rights, and particularly those of children, women, and other vulnerable groups. So by comparison, the average score for international framework among the RTEI countries was 70%. So you can see how significantly below average we are. And as human rights as champions that we claim to be, it's really important for us to address this issue. And so the second issue we chose to highlight was around early childhood education and development. And this issue comes as a compilation of 3 of the sub-themes, which were the aims of education, free education, and the education of minorities and indigenous peoples, which we scored 27%, 29%, and 33% on, again, among some of the lowest scores in comparison to other RTEI countries. So together, these sub-themes really emphasize the need to further invest in early childhood education and development. We put some of the findings here on this slide for you, but we noted that less than half of the decentralized laws, policies, and curriculum include aims that emphasize the full development of a child, such as targeting their social and emotional learning, and teacher training also proves to be an issue in this regard. And as we know, access to pre-primary schools are often associated with high costs, and when there are free pre-primary schools available in states, access is limited and comes with several conditions and requirements, and there's also often a severe waiting list and just difficult to access. Next slide. So this brings me to our highlighted issue recommendations. We put together a list of recommendations that we believe will help to address the highlighted issues and move the US forward towards the right to free, quality, and inclusive education for all. So for issue 1 on the framework, international framework, we simply put, the US needs to support relevant treaties and conventions and include these principles into US policies. Now we realize that that's a lofty recommendation and a bit complicated, as treaty ratification requires the approval of 2/3 vote in the US Senate, which has historically proven to be difficult. However, there are actions that can be taken to address this issue by raising public awareness on the different conventions and treaties that need ratification, asking the president to prepare recommendations for ratification, and informing senators and other key policymakers about the importance of these treaties and conventions. And for issue 2, our recommendation is to establish laws, policies, and curriculum that aim at the holistic development of child's social, emotional, cognitive, and physical needs in order to build a solid foundation for lifelong learning and well-being. So this requires several targeted actions to ensure access to quality, inclusive early childhood education and development programs and services, some of which we've listed for you here, including supporting the Child Care for Working Families Act, increasing federal support for early child education and development services, incentivizing and supporting states in moving towards a universal pre-primary programming, and making programs affordable. But you can find the full list of our recommendations in our draft that we're sharing with you. It should be in the chat if it's not already. And we're absolutely open to your recommendations as well. Next slide. So that really sums up our presentation for today. These are our next steps, but as of right now, we need to finalize this country brief by Friday. So a little bit of an urgency there, and we would really appreciate your input and suggestions and recommendations through track changes on the doc and in the Google Doc that we're sharing with you. If you could do that by 12 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, that would be really greatly appreciated. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. We appreciate your presentation, and thank you, Jennifer, for including that link in the chat for folks to go ahead and edit the country brief and with track changes before tomorrow. We realize it's a very tight turnaround, so we appreciate your input. We have a few minutes left, and with the time that we have, we wanted to take advantage of having so many passionate education experts on the call and open up the floor for you to share your strategies and discuss joint advocacy priorities around how we're handling the situation in Ukraine. If your organization has anything planned or currently in the works that we could support you with as a global education coalition, we would love to hear that. So we'll have maybe 2 or 3 minutes for discussion, and then I'll go into some announcements. Feel free to just come in.
Hi, this is Rose. I might start the conversation. Having been in these situations before, of course, the first couple of days, even the first couple of weeks, are all about responding to the chaos and to the immediate needs, as I said, about shelter and food and water and such. The advantage that we have is that these particular refugees are coming, are going into European countries, which have a little more stability and wealth and the ability to respond to those in need. Doesn't make the situation any better. It's a tearful situation on a daily basis, but you'll find that those that are providing services, the basic needs, whether it's government or whatever, military or such, they have to stabilize things. And so, but that doesn't mean we have to sit and wait. That means we have to prepare. So my first step is I have coordinated with different embassies, different countries here in the DC area, which are very receptive to listening to what the possibilities are. And with their support, you can be exported. And of course, the first one is funding. So we were already doing that. We're already contributing to the different funding sources. Some of my larger organizations that I belong to, like Rotary International, preparing packages, the trauma and mental health piece of it. And that's not as simple as doing something virtually, because mental health is such a critical area that you really do need to have the experts on the ground. So I've been invited to basically evaluate a hackathon event, which is going to occur, which I'm going to give them the mission to create, an app that will find resources in each of these countries that they can refer to. So they'll know where to go for mental health services and such. And then also to design the, exportable packages to basically give children something to refer to. I mean, if they have a crisis that's going on within themselves, the ability to be able to look at on their phone an app that brings them to the services that they need and gives them an opportunity to respond to their emotions, basically.
Thank you, Rose, for that important point. I did also see on another listserv that there's a list of Ukrainian language counselors and therapists who can be contacted via WhatsApp. So if that is something that would be helpful for your listservs, we're happy to forward. Chrissy, you said, Suzanne, you said the ECD kits, UNICEF's ECD kits and learning kits is another important point. We have maybe time for one more comment, otherwise we'll go into final announcements. But if your organization is doing anything on this that you would like us to help amplify or collaborate with you on, we'd be happy to do so. And please follow up with us, with Jennifer or I, via email afterwards. Thank you, Jennifer, also for sharing UNICEF's Ukraine appeal there in the chat. Okay, if we don't have anyone jumping at the chance to jump in right now, we'll follow up via email and have this as an ongoing conversation, but just wanted to make it clear that we are monitoring this and are very aware of the need to make sure that education is embedded in the humanitarian response at the moment. Looking forward to March, now that we're already in the second day of March, we wanted to flag for you that we have the Inclusive Education and Early Childhood Community of Practice event coming up on March 30th at 9 a.m. We'll put the link to that in the chat for you to register. And then, as our colleague Cristina so aptly highlighted earlier, the Global Action Week for Education, which all of Global Campaign for Education participates in, is the last week of April 25th through 29th. So we typically have an event every day of the week. We're already planning for our next coalition meeting that week, which will be on April 26th at 9 a.m. ET. We'll put the link for you to get that on your calendars and go ahead and register there as well. And in the meantime, we would love for you to know that you can send us any campaigns that your organization is working on that you would like us to highlight that week, or if you would like to write a blog for the Global Campaign for Education blog for us to highlight on our website and social media and help you amplify, we would love to help with that as well. So just a general plug to be highlighting and sharing these messages with us throughout this month and months to come. And we're so grateful for your collaboration and your partnership, and please do keep us in the loop of ways in which we can best support you. So with that said, thank you so much for joining the coalition meeting today and actively participating. We're so appreciative of your work in championing education for all children and youth. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone.